Welcome to Community Policy Speaks, our podcast here at the Community Policy Forum. So the Community Policy Forum is an independent think tank seeking to promote evidence-based and community-centered approaches to policymaking surrounding the structural inequalities facing British Muslim communities. We attempt this through connecting policymakers with academic research and experts, and through providing platforms for engagement with diverse Muslim voices on areas of contemporary importance. Today's episode is on a very contentious and a very, very important topic and issue. Last month, the Supreme Court passed a unanimous judgment that the government's Rwanda scheme, under which asylum seekers would be sent to Rwanda, is unlawful. The court declared that there is a real risk that asylum seekers will not have their claims decided properly in Rwanda. As a result, asylum seekers would be returned to their country of origin, where they would be faced with ill treatment that in many cases may have encouraged them to seek asylum in the first place. The government subsequently tabled the Safety of Rwanda, Asylum and Immigration Bill, an emergency piece of legislation stipulating Rwanda to be a safe third country. Last week, MPs voted on the bill at second reading in the House of Commons, with the government winning by a majority of 44. Today we shall discuss this bill, the Rwanda scheme, tying this into the government's wider asylum policy, and also where we go from here and what steps we can take as communities, as advocacy organizations on this issue. We're very, very fortunate to be joined by two wonderful guests today. Firstly, Fiza Qureshi. Fiza is the CEO of the Migrants' Rights Network, a campaigning organization that works alongside migrants to co-create campaigns and activities and to influence changes at a systemic level. She is also on the board of The 3 Million, a director of Migrants at Work, and an honorary advisory member of the Black Europeans. Secondly, we're joined by our very own Samiha Rafiq, a graduate in both Islamic studies and psychological sciences. Samiha works as a researcher here at the Community Policy Forum to put her interests in politics, policy, and community organization to good use. Thank you once again both for taking out time to join us today for this discussion. So firstly, coming to yourself, Fiza, could you please provide a little bit more context for listeners about the background to this bill, to the Rwanda scheme, and tell us a little bit about how we got to this point and where this bill has come from?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast. So I think, where are we with this Rwanda bill? It's been a long haul, basically. It's the government's attempt to provide a deterrence effect to the small boat crossings. It has found a scapegoat, basically, of people who are having to use the channel as a crossing route to get to the UK to find sanctuary, as the tool to basically push through these bills and these schemes. So the bill comes on the back of two other acts that are now in legislation, which is the Nationality and Borders Act, and then it's called the Illegal Migration Act. We call it the Inhumane Migration Act, and it's basically about making a claim of asylum and refugee protection on our shores illegal if you didn't use so-called regular means. And it's near impossible to do that unless you're offered a safe route method, or you have a scheme that allows you to get to the UK and then claim asylum. So the Rwanda bill came as like a very surprise, like add-on to the end of the Nationality and Borders Act, and it was immediately challenged, like legally, and the right thing to do. It was to take it to the courts and prove that any essentially deportations to Rwanda would be unsafe, illegal, unjust. And what they have done is they've really found that this is their this is the thing that they're going to hold on to. They're refusing to let go of the fact that this is an unsafe kind of piece of legislation and an attempt. And they've gone through now 3 courts, and they've got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has also said, yeah, absolutely, it's unsafe to send anyone to Rwanda, and you can't make it safe, basically. And I know that the government is throwing its money at this, and that's the other thing. They've invested millions. We're talking, I think we're about 240 million at the moment. Potentially another 50 million is going to be thrown at this. And so there's that kind of like almost like embarrassment that they actually haven't been able to get this scheme in effect. No one, fortunately, has been sent to Rwanda. Planes, when they have been about to take off, have been kind of stayed through the courts. And I think, so, you know, the government is now just like determined. It's like, it's an agenda, it's a political agenda to make this work now.
Thank you, Fizza. And just staying with yourself for a second, I mean, why Rwanda? The layperson may be thinking of all the countries in the world. Why Rwanda, this small country nestled in East Africa? Why is it that the government has this asylum arrangement with the Rwandan government? You mentioned the fact that 240 million has already been spent. I think it's something like 3 home secretaries have gone to Rwanda, which is more than any asylum seekers that have actually been successfully deported to Rwanda. So there's certainly an irony there.
I mean, it's a really good question. And I think we haven't probably interrogated that enough as to why they've chosen Rwanda as the destination. But what you have and can see is how amenable the Rwandan government are to this scheme, how they have and are trying to do everything in their capabilities to make this scheme work. One, it will be about the investment that they are offering. Two, it will be about improving the country's human rights record, probably. You know, Rwanda has gone through its own genocide, and it's got its own history of, you know, quite a very tragic and dark period. And now you want to come out of that and you want to show the country in a more positive light. They have done something very similar, or they tried to do something very similar with Israel previously. It failed, it didn't work. I don't have lots of details on like kind of the failure, but apart from that, it wasn't safe. It did not, you know, sending people to Rwanda did not mean that they weren't then returned on to other countries and then face persecution. You know, if you've got a country that is looking for investment, that is looking for a way to kind of put itself on the map, this is a great way, isn't it, to offer yourself and offer your resources to a very wealthy Western country and say we can basically outsource your refugee protection duties to us, and we'll sort it out for you. So yeah, I think there's a lot of concern around like why Rwanda and just what will happen with the rest of this bill.
Thank you, Fiz, and we're going to definitely kind of come on to later on this discussion, discussing, what could be next for the bill and for this wider scheme. So coming to yourself, Samiha, in your opinion, what links can be drawn between this bill, the Rwanda scheme as a whole, and the government's wider stance on immigration?
I think the overwhelming link is that it really violates international law. For example, the Home Secretary, he couldn't confirm that it meets the standards, the Rwanda bill meets the standards of the European Convention on Human Rights. And there's a lot of assertion of parliamentary sovereignty and directing UK courts to kind of abandon, you know, any application of international laws. And of course, if we look at the illegal migration bill, the UN has declared that it breaches, you know, UK's obligations to international law. And it also reflects the government's sort of negative rhetoric towards asylum seekers. And of course, Suella Braverman, before her departure, did a lot of damage in the way that she used language towards asylum seekers. She claimed that the southeast of England was, you know, being invaded by asylum seekers, a word that was then picked up by Telegram far-right groups where they thrive. And also we have her saying that, you know, it's her dream to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. And then also Rishi Sunak's Stop the Boat slogan, which was then also picked up by far-right groups protesting outside of hotels housing asylum seekers. So we have breaking international law, we have, you know, this unnecessary assertion of parliamentary sovereignty, and also the rhetoric. It's just a continuation of all those things. And this Rwanda bill just cements the government's move towards a more anti-migrant and extreme anti-migrant stance, really.
Yeah, no, I totally echo what Samia said in terms of the language and the rhetoric, which has really got us to this position where you can have a bill like this in Parliament and it's past second reading. The fact that we've got to a place where we are willing to, send people to a third country when they have asked for sanctuary here is just, it's pretty appalling. And I mean, UK's not got a great history, to be honest, but this is probably one of the very low points. I think circumventing court and judicial decisions by creating firstly a treaty with Rwanda to basically make it so that Rwanda agrees that it will not return anyone from Rwanda to another country. So if asylum claims are unsuccessful, those individuals will remain in Rwanda. I don't know what happens to them in Rwanda. That's also not clear. But then and then the bill itself, which basically is going to ignore and disallow and disapply lots. I mean, pretty much the whole of the Human Rights Act, pretty much all the kind of human rights legislation that people are really reliant on to make sure that states, especially in the UK, does its duty. It's basically circumventing and quashing so many other conventions and laws as well. So the European Convention on Human Rights is going to be affected in terms of how it's applied. The Refugee Convention. I mean, there's so many conventions and laws that this just basically just completely I don't even know what the word is. Basically, just quashing it. It's really concerning that this will become the blueprint. If this gets passed, this will be the blueprint for other deals and other treaties and bills with other countries that the government goes and negotiates with and basically tries to manufacture them to be a safe country. And so, if you can do this with Rwanda, which has been proven to be unsafe still by the highest court in our land, they can move on to Afghanistan, they can move on to Iraq, they can move on to Syria, Yemen, all these countries where we know that we've got people coming to the UK and claiming asylum from, just to go and do exactly the same. Like it's just about setting that precedent for us and for other European countries as well. We've seen, I think it was Denmark, who's also looking at a similar scheme with Rwanda. So it's setting the foundations for other things and other countries to follow in its footsteps.
So last week, an Albanian asylum seeker sadly took his own life on the Bibi Stockholm barge. Samiha, what does his death in similar cases tell us about the government's treatment of asylum seekers?
The government's treatment is far from ideal, and there have been numerous calls that the treatment of asylum seekers needs to come within the margins of international law, because they're not. For example, if you take housing and where asylum seekers are being housed and kept, essentially, the conditions are unlivable in certain places. So, for example, you have the Manston, I believe it's not a hotel, but it's like a facility which has, it at one point exceeded its maximum number of people that it can hold, and no other arrangements were made to cater for the extra individuals. And there was also outbreaks of diseases such as diphtheria, norovirus, and scabies. And this mounting number of people that are being held in facilities like this is essentially due to the asylum backlog, which leaves asylum seekers with an intense uncertainty of what's going to happen to them. And it's, and in the current situation of what happened, the tragic incident in the Bibi Stockholm, where people describe it as like a prison where they have to go through airport style security, even if they've gone out for a cigarette. There's lack of food. And there's a fear that, I think one individual said that they are all scared that the boat will be launched and taken to Rwanda without them knowing. And this backlog that's there, is leaving people with this really intense mental health issues. And it's just asking yourself, like, imagine you're, in a facility with this fear, with uncertainty, and with people around you also having the same mentality as you. It's not, it doesn't leave a lot of room for hope. And so there is an increasing mental health crisis amongst the asylum seekers. And as someone with a background in psychology, it does make you think that there should be such a humane approach to people who've come from one horror that have then come to this, another extreme. And, at one point, UK prided itself as being a place where it provided comfort and it provided sanctuary. And I read recently that with the way that the UK dealt with the Ukraine refugees, it kind of gave a glimmer of hope that there was a humane way to do this. But I feel like that is now gone. And we've now come back to this almost, it's removed from the reality that we should be seeing. And it's such a tragedy. So yeah, I mean, this bill just really really makes it all that much more stronger that the government don't seem to have a lot of humanity when dealing with asylum seekers and refugees. And if you take a look at the way that they are providing resources and also sort of funding, I think they've increased funding for refugees, the weekly allowance, by 25 pence, which is not a lot in terms of being able to, in terms of in times of inflation as well, to really do much with. And also just the general approach that they've been taking is quite tragic. So yeah, there's not a lot left to say, really.
Completely agree, Samiha. Thank you for addressing that. Moving forward a little bit more, let's discuss a little bit more about what could be next. So coming first yourself, Visa, what could be next for this bill? I mean, inevitably it will come back into the Commons for third reading in the new year. And secondly, what would be a more suitable approach by the government, whether it's a Conservative government, we obviously have an election coming up, or potentially an incoming Labour government? What would be a more suitable approach by the British government in order to reform UK migration policy? Samiha mentioned a backlog of asylum claims. There's obviously a lack of safe routes. What would a more suitable asylum and immigration policy look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's going to come back in the new year for another reading. We've already seen that there is, strangely, a bit of a division in the camp in terms of quite senior Conservatives or people who've held ministerial posts, like Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick, abstain against the bill in the second reading because they think it's not harsh enough, basically. They want it to be worse. They don't want the opportunity for people seeking refugee protection to be able to use our domestic courts at all. They just want people to be put on planes and that's it. So I think there is going to be a battle for Rishi Sunak himself in terms of whether he amends the bill so that it does appease the Suella and the others who've abstained. But then he's got to balance it with the civil libertarians who are also concerned about this bill in its entirety. I mean, at the moment, no Conservative voted against it, but I mean, fingers crossed that we will find that there's a bit more opposition when it goes to the next vote. And that actually, common sense prevails, that this bill cannot and should not be passed. As you said, I don't think that there has been enough vocal opposition from the opposition in terms of the Labour Party. I think, that kind of vacuum that exists at the moment is being filled up with individuals who are just talking about how they're going to make Rwanda work and the kind of Rwanda plan work. What we would obviously ideally like is for there to actually that investment to be put into supporting the asylum backlog, so that actually decisions are being made justly. People are not languishing for years on end, waiting to find out whether they are going to get protection. We would want more safe routes and schemes like the Ukrainian scheme, which is like an ideal one in a way. And I know it's got its faults and it hasn't been implemented in the best way at times, but it's the perfect scheme for when war and conflict, and we are all very aware that there's persecution happening within a country. I mean, why wasn't a very similar scheme set up straight away for Afghanistan? You could argue, and I appreciate that not all Palestinians will want to have to take on kind of come through a scheme like this because of the right of return, but that should have been offered. That should be on the table for any nationality. And the fact that we've only offered it to a Western European national state and its citizens is, it speaks volumes, really, to be honest. And, but we also want them to consider, like, what does safety look like? So as Samia mentioned, people are coming to the UK and then they're being put in these inhumane spaces. The Bibi barge, the hotels, the military bases, these really rural areas where they are at risk from the far right. It's like their safety is it's not just about their safety to get to the UK and seek sanctuary, but it's also about their safety once they're here. That doesn't seem to come into play at all. This government is not considering how it is creating a really unsafe space for many asylum seekers as well. So I really think and hope, I'm not sure it's going to happen with this government, sadly, like in terms of a change in rhetoric, language, stance. It's very much a political agenda. It's very much about, delivering on their commitments, as they would say it. But I hope that if there was any change in the government in the future, that they would actually start to be thinking about treating people with compassion and really thinking about their safety and well-being once they've arrived in the UK.
Thank you, Fizza. I wanted to come to yourself, Samiha, with just one final question to instill some sense of positivity, some sense of hope in these most testing times. But Samiha, what could communities be doing to create a welcoming environment for asylum seekers? Whatever we can do to push back against much of this negative rhetoric and language from the government, from politicians, from the far right that you've mentioned. What can we as individuals be doing, and what can communities as a whole in the UK be doing?
Thank you for that question, Kasim. I feel like it's nice to end on something positive, positive as can be. I think that maybe grassroots mobilization is something that can really help to make a more welcoming environment for refugees. So I'm talking about spaces like schools where child refugees will have the opportunity to kind of experience something happy, positive, and also places of worship and community centers can provide spaces for people to come and talk about their experiences, to just kind of have a support structure, things like coffee mornings that are tailored towards being more welcoming towards refugees. I think those kinds of situations can really help to give refugees a chance to kind of break away from all of the negativity that they may have experienced, are experiencing, and it just gives them a few hours to just kind of have a stress-free environment. And I'm not saying it's going to make everything better, but it will contribute positively to their mental health, which can be such a it can give such a glimmer of hope. So I firmly believe in the power of grassroots organization and the power of communities. And so, yeah, and I feel like, and I think maybe Fizza, you could add to this as well. But yeah, and I just think that positive spaces for people who are seeking sanctuary, it's so crucial.
Fizza, is there anything that you would like to add in order to have the last word on this?
I completely echo positive spaces. I think also for people who are not experiencing the asylum refugee system to be really true allies by speaking up, speaking out, speaking against the bills, the language, the rhetoric, really challenging it to demonstrate to also those who have come here for protection that it's not in our name, that it's where we hear it and where we see it, we will challenge it wherever possible. And just to demonstrate that we do they are welcome. And we have, and we want the UK to take on its obligations, especially as it has possibly created quite a lot of the refugees and the need for people to flee those spaces. And yeah, I think it's like Samir said, it's really about localism and it's about that community level. It's about getting the mosques to actually stand up and welcome refugees and not be relying on other faiths and places of worship to only offer those spaces. It's about our diaspora communities really recognizing their own migration histories and saying, hey, look, we came for whatever reason, and we understand that why we are starting to understand why other people are coming here. And now that they're here, here's what we can do to make it a little bit easier for them as they navigate this very, very difficult asylum process, decision-making process, and just the journey that they might be going through. As Samir said, while they're still experiencing that trauma of what they've, for why they fled as well. So, yeah, we really need our local communities to step up as well and provide those welcoming spaces.
Thank you, Fizza. So on that somewhat positive and certainly constructive note, that brings our discussion to a close. This will certainly not be the last discussion that we'll be having on this topic, because this scheme is still being pushed through by this government and it's only going to be ramped up next year in the lead up to a general election. So we will see what happens next in the new year. Thank you once again, Fizza and Samir, for taking time out in order to join us for today's discussion. Thank you to everyone for listening. Make sure that you share this podcast far and wide on whichever platforms you're listening in on. Keep up with the work of Community Policy Forum on social media, and also keep up with the brilliant work of the Migrants' Rights Network on their social media channels as well. And do check out the amazing work that they are doing in regard to asylum, immigration, and community advocacy as a whole. Thank you, both of you, and thank you everyone for listening.